a very close friend, Naomi Simmonds, who is our kōrero for the day. And I'm just going to pass it straight over to her, where she can have a little bit of kōrero about who and what she is. Tēnā koe, Naomi.
Tēnā koe hone, tēnā te mahina nui kia koe, nā i tūwhira I tēnei wānanga, tēnei kōrero. He mokopuna tēnei no Raukawa, no Raukawa Te Kaukaro Pātatere. I am a freshwater girl from the middle of the North Island, born and bred in Putaru. Found myself out here on the coast. I'm allergic to seafood and I've shacked up with a coastie diver / surfer. So feeling a little bit out of my comfort zone here in Te Tairāwhiti, which is where I live. I've been here for about 4 years. Have 3 tamariki, 16, 9 and 3. So busy with all of the stages of life. And I guess I land into this conversation from a few different places. So I am a researcher. My background is in environmental research, working with our taiao and mātaranga and kōrero e pāna ki te taiao. More recently, I've moved into kind of mana wahine, whānau ora, rangahau, and I also have a love and passion for hikoi. So one of my big research projects was retracing our tupuna kuia's haerenga mahinarangi from Hastings back to Rangiatea. Whole nother webinar, that one, but that's kind of where it comes in to the kōrero a little bit. And I'm fortunate to be part of the Paurahui research kaupapa that's led by Professor Kura Paul Burke, which is looking at rāhui specifically in the context of the Hauraki Gulf, Tikapa Moana, and kind of entangled into all of that is I'm also a whānau member here with Tāikie, Tāneora and Tauwhi, and so been thinking about this particular kaupapa in ways that sit outside of or alongside our taiao kaupapa as well. So yeah, that's a little bit of a very quick download of part CV, part who I am as well. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Naomi. Just as a reminder, whānau, there is a chat function in the webinar, so if you have any pātai, please leave your pātai there. We'll cut off, or we'll have a Q&A session around with about 10-15 minutes to go. And so let's just dive straight into the kōrero. What is your understanding of rāhui from a more traditional sense?
Yeah, I think I've had the fortune to be sitting a little bit in some of the historical literature around how rāhui was used traditionally. So most of us probably understand rāhui is often used when there is a mate, often in a water body, and we will, or the local iwi hapu will put a rāhui to acknowledge the tapu of what has happened there and to give it a period of time to rest before we move into our noa activities, whether that's food gathering, surfing, recreation, haha. Era momoahua. We also, though, used rāhui when we saw, or when our tipuna saw, tohu of degradation or of species or parts of our taiao needing rest and regeneration. And so one of the really important elements of that kind of rāhui is having a really intimate understanding of what is happening in the taiao. How did our tupuna know that our tuna, for example, were needing a rest from us harvesting them or gathering them in particular kinds of places and ways? And so for me, rāhui is both a practice of protection of our taonga species, of our wāhi, but it's also a practice of regeneration, and it's really purposeful in that. It is temporary, so it was often a temporary protection that was put on a specific place for a period of time, and that period of time could have been any stretch of time, because the way that they marked rāhui and set it down and pulled rāhui off that's the right kind of wording, was by their intimate relationship with what was happening in that place or with that species. And so for me, that's a really important part of it. It's tied, I think, directly to our concepts of tapu, of noa, and of mauri. So how do we understand that the mauri of a place or a species is in need of rest and regeneration? Koira te pātai nui, that's a really important question. How do we understand when that is in need of rest and restoration? And how do we know when that species or that place has been restored to a sense where we can then engage with it in our day-to-day ways? So yeah, it's quite a complex and not complex kaupapa at the same time, I think. There's a couple of things I think from the research that I have looked at that were really important. One was rāhui were established by certain people. So there was a mana that came with bestowing a rāhui on a place. And that was really, really important. The other really important thing traditionally that sat in rāhui is that it was not just about physical regeneration. It was a taha wairua practice as well. And I think that's really important for us to understand what that might look and feel like in a more contemporary setting. And there were really interesting kōrero in the literature around physical markers of rāhui. So pou rāhui that were established. Some of them were permanent, and there would be a tohu that would be put on that pou rāhui around a lake or a river, for example, when a rāhui was needed. So there was a pou, kind of a kaitiaki of that place, and then there would be some kind of marker. In some areas it was kokowai, so there would be kokowai marked on that pou, and then he tohu, kua rāhui te rā wāhi. And then others, it was an item of clothing, actually, that was tied to the pou. So there's some really interesting practices as well. And there was a kōrero in one of the historical documents that talked about rāhui and the importance of karakia in setting and ending a rāhui period. And they talked about it, they said the karakia sharpens the teeth of the rāhui. So your karakia sharpens the niho of that rāhui and its impact. And probably the last thing I would say traditionally is that there was impact if you broke that rāhui. And there was an understanding of that it wasn't just just kind of try and avoid that area. It was quite a strong protective mechanism over those wāhi as well.
Well, you mentioned Māori, and for those of us who don't speak or don't have any understanding of Te Ao Māori, could you give us a short explanation of what Māori is and how that applies to this current kōrero of rāhui?
Yeah. I think we'll all have our own understanding of what Māori is, and we might all have our own kupu, in our own words, in our own cultural context of what this might be. A lot of people refer to it as life essence, of our life force. What are some of the other ways that we kind of understand it? It is, it's your vitality in a way. It's the vitality of an area, of a species, of a person, of a rōpū, of a kaupapa. And so that vitality, as we know, if we think just about our seasons and our environment, ebbs and flows depending on a whole range of different things. And so it's not, I think we often look at rāhui as something where we go, oh no, it's really bad, something's really bad that's happened. But actually it was a practice that worked in conjunction with the seasons and with those ebbs and flows of Māori as well. We use it more contemporarily, particularly in the environment space, because we live in a world where the impacts on our species are such that actually it is a protective mechanism, because things have been depleted to such a state that, they're at risk of extinction, or they're at risk of kind of being forever not there in a certain area. So it has become a necessity in that respect. But I had a kōrero with a Kuia a while ago, and she said traditionally rāhui were not ambulance at the bottom of the cliff mechanisms. They were a form of prevention. So they were a form of protecting ourselves before it got to crisis situation, in terms of our taiao and ourselves.
So we've given all the historical context of what rāhui was to our tipuna, what it has been used for, some of the applications of rāhui. In your experience, in a more contemporary sense, what are some of the applications of rāhui now, and some of the mahi that you've done, and some of the personal spaces that you've found yourself with other people who are looking for that rest and replenishment that come with rāhui?
Yeah, there's lots of ways that rāhui is being used. So we are using it contemporarily in taiao spaces, probably the most common form. We still use it when there are mate happening, when there have been mate in our waters in particular, or in a particular area. So those two kind of traditional forms of rāhui we can still see continuing. Some of that, particularly around the taiao, has been put into legislative form or into policy form. And I think that's a really interesting thing to unpack. Whenever our traditional concepts get put into, even with good intention, a legislative and policy framework that is not ours, there is a risk to that. And I won't go right there now, but I think that's an important thing for us to hold on to. And there's lots of examples. Kaitiakitanga and the Resource Management Act is one that there's been lots written about. Rāhui is one as well. And I think they are also practices and kaupapa that, when held with the right foundation and context, can serve us really well in our contemporary settings. Our tupuna adapted tikanga, they adapted their practice. We have many, many examples of that. Rāhui, in more contemporary expressions, has been applied in a few different ways. So we've seen rāhui applied as a kupu. I think it was applied in COVID-19. Talking about rāhui in that sense. There was a lot of controversy around how it was applied in that sense. It's been applied in terms of people's personal boundaries. I've heard people talk a lot about what they're kind of putting under rāhui and what they're, what is more open in their own personal lives. And I guess the piece that I wanted to talk more about today, which sits in the context of the taiki whare, is that we have employed rāhui as part of a seasonal practice that exists after matariki, where our kaupapa, our whare, and our whānau are in a rest and regeneration period. So when matariki hits, we go into rāhui for a period of a week, and the intention that was set down for that by the taiki whānau was that this is a period of rest and regeneration. It wasn't just a holiday. It's not just an annual leave type thing. Not that we have employees necessarily. It was a really intentional pause in the year at a time in our maramataka, in our Māori calendar, that tells us this is the time to rest and regenerate. So it's incorporating the maramataka into it, and a time for the kaupapa to rest and regenerate. And with that rest and regeneration, there is an element of our spiritual selves that come into that. So again, the whānau are encouraged as much as possible to use it as a time of reflection, to use it as a time to call in the things that are regenerative, not just switch off from the world and do whatever else we might decide to do. And a little bit for us, I think some of the things we've been talking about is how do we prepare to go into rāhui and not just crash and burn into rāhui. I think we've been doing this for 3 years now. The first year, I think a lot of us ran full steam at Rahui and then crashed into Rahui and then spent that period kind of in recovery, right?
Yep.
As opposed to in regeneration. I think last year we learned a little bit more about actually what that period was meant to be. And this year, again, we're doing a little bit more proactive preparation as we move into that. And I think it was inspired by was Sport Tairāwhiti then, their social policy around, again, giving their kaimahi a rest. There are others that have used Rahui in a similar way, not in the same way, but in a similar way as kind of a social policy within their own organisations as well.
That's a cool one. What are some of so when you talk about not trying to crash and burn into Rahui, what are some of the examples of not just the crashing and burning stuff of it, what are some of the measures that you've taken to ensure that you're getting to Rahui and thinking intentionally about regeneration?
Yeah, I think there's a few layers. So I think the invitation often feels like it's an individual thing for us to do. Oh, yeah, we've got Rahui coming up. What am I individually going to do with my whānau, during this period? Or what am I not going to do? I think we have the ability to open that invitation in a more collective sense.
Yeah.
Actually, what does this period of regeneration mean for a kaupapa? What does it actually mean to rest a kaupapa and our relationship to that kaupapa? I think it is an invitation for us to interrogate that relationship. What does that relationship look and feel like in my current world, and where that kaupapa is sitting? And what is the offering when I come back into that kaupapa once the rahui is lifted? In terms of preparation, we've been really thinking and talking about what are the things that we actually want to put down before rahui? What are the things we don't want to carry into rahui for ourselves individually, but also for our kaupapa? So, we did a bit of a prep session last week. Last week. And so that was an opportunity for the whānau and the collective to think about things like, actually, I really don't want to bring into rahui the overscheduling. I really don't want to bring into rahui the self-doubt that I have, or, for everyone, it is all different. But I think actually reflecting on those things for ourselves is a really important part of the process of moving into regeneration, as opposed to just the switch off, zone out kind of rest that I think we're often used to in the current world. But the other thing is, what do you want to call in? What are the things that give you nourishment, that restore your mauri? For some of us, it's just sleep. I'm sorry, I have a 3-year-old. It's just sleep. Like, it is just, actually, I'm just going to call in some deep rest, not the scrolling, not the Netflix, but actually it's deep rest. For others, it's buying a saxophone and learning a new skill. For others, it is spending time with your tamariki in wonderful, chaotic play. I think we often land into holidays, for example, burnt out, tired, ready to switch off. Rahui is not that. It is different. Yes, there will be rest, but it is a really purposeful thinking and sometimes doing the stuff that is regenerative for you and your whānau. And I think often our whānau can be a sacrifice of our mahi or of our kaupapa. And I don't mean that in any judgment. I just mean that our whānau are often the ones who get the rest. They don't always get the best. And I think this is a really important opportunity for us to refocus the best in our whānau and then think about the rest at another time.
I notice here in the room we have a lot of people who sit at the heads of organizations. And so like one thing I wanted to talk about was kind of what kind of leadership it takes to kind of get Rahui to become more of an open whakaaro when it comes to not just our orgs, but it's like seeing the people that work within our organizations, the different kaupapa that we're a part of. What kind of leadership does it take to kind of not enforce, but encourage people to take on the idea of Rahui?
Yeah. I think it takes some bravery and some courage. I think it takes a really keen eye to actually see, and again, I go back to how it was traditionally applied. Our tupuna could see when something needed rest and regeneration, right? They lived in that kind of symbiotic relationship with their taiao, that they could see that, and they could see the benefits of what that period of rest and regeneration would do in the long term. So I think as leaders, thinking and seeing with a keen eye, what are the tohu that tell us that our teams, that our mahi is needing some rest and is needing some regeneration. I think one of the really beautiful things about a Rahui period is that we know we're all doing that work collectively together. It's quite different from annual leave, where an individual might take a week off here, then someone's got a few days off here, and then and so our energies are all quite varied across time. Whereas this, whether people use it in that way or not is, again, that's up to individuals to lean into the practice. But as a leader, to make that decision that collectively our kaupapa, our mahi, our people, the people that are breathing this work into life, need rest and regeneration, or they need the space for that to happen, I think is a really brave decision. And I think the other thing I would say that is needed is the reflection piece afterwards. Actually, how was that for the team? Whether it's a week, whether it's a day, people will have their own parameters around how they're working. But I think the design of Rahui is it's intentional. It is about going inward for reflection and regeneration. But then I think it is about coming back together and learning from each other about what that means for the kaupapa and for ourselves moving forward. And that's just a constant cycle. Like this is only our 3rd year in Take Year, and we've had lots of learnings in 2 years, and no doubt at the end of our Rahui week, there'll be a whole lot more learning for us to pick up and carry forward in the next time. And I do just want to mihi to Kane and Renee, because it was their leadership and their decision-making for Take Year that initiated this into our whare with the collective whānau support. And like, I'll be honest, when we first had the first year of Rahui, I was like, I'll just work from home. I just carry on. It'll be all good. And it wasn't actually until we had karakia to put the Rahui in place that I went a little bit more inward and went, oh, okay, this isn't just a week off the kaupapa, right? This is different. And that was the kind of, and I guess that's, to go back to that kōrero around karakia, give our kaupapa some teeth in terms of what they're doing when you lean into that. For me, that was my experience. And then I kind of went, okay, what can I do in this period that actually is regenerative? In this space. And last year I was a little bit more like, right, I'm doing absolutely nothing, and just kind of did nothing and got to the end and went, okay, I feel like I'm ready to do some regenerative work now. And we were kind of back. So again, this year, a little bit more preparation in the lead into Rahui to go, actually, what is my intention for this time? Not what am I going to do in the week, but actually what is my intention? And what do I want to really call in that space? And I think we can all do that in different ways in our ao, but it does require, and I was thinking about this because one of the questions I think was around, can Rahui apply to people? And I was kind of like, oh, can it? Maybe it shouldn't. I was going round and round in circles with it. And actually, where I'm from, and for many of us, we talk about that as people, we are part of the ecosystem. We are part of the environment, right? We talk about ko au te awa, ko te awa ko au. And if we actually really believe that to be true in its kind of most foundational form, then we are a species in the ecosystem that actually we should be thinking about some of these taiao-based practices, these wairua-based practices for ourselves in our own context. That isn't to say that there aren't risks when it moves into a people-centered focus. And that's why I think it is actually really important for us to understand when we do rahui, who holds that rahui space? Is it grounded in the whenua that we are on in terms of setting that rahui up? Like, I think we need to be really careful that we're not taking concepts from Te Ao Māori and just putting them in a tangata-centric space without understanding their deep hononga to the taiao, to Te Ao Wairua, to all of those things. And that's a really important part of the leadership. Might not be that we individually have all of that, but how do we build the relationships, right, with that wider whānau, so that if we decide to do something like this, we know that that is, one, a safe thing for us to be doing for our collective, and we understand the intentionality around how it is done as well.
Just 1 minute. Just to remind everybody, there is a chat function, and we will be having Q&A in about 15 minutes. So if you have any pātai for gnomes, please write them in the chat, and we will get to them then. Hoki ana ki ngā kōrero, tēnei te mihi atu kia koe e te hoa. What are some of the outcomes that have come from your experience of, so some of the learnings that have come from your experience of rahui within Taiki, within some of the other contexts? What are some of the outcomes that have come from rahui?
I'll start with, I guess, maybe my experience with Taiki, because there's lots of others in the whānau that have had different experiences as well of rahui. I think that's part of it. We're not all going to have the same experience of that time. I'm really confronted by rest, if I'm really honest. When there is a vacuum in my world, I like to fill it with things. And so even if it's a holiday, I like to fill that with some personal development or some learning a new something or a doing. And actually, I think when we think about rahui is about being. It moves us away from the doingness of the world that we live in, and it invites us to be. That to me is confronting. That's just my own personal relationship with that. But I think the beautiful thing about rahui for me is it is a really intentional pause for us to do that inner work. To do, or to sit with that inner stuff that we all might hold. So for some of us, it is actually overworking is a tohu that we are not necessarily in balance in our own mauri. Or, there'll be a whole lot of other tohu. I think having a really purposeful rahui period for us at Taiki asks us to think about what those tohu are for us as individuals. I think that's a real benefit in terms of our own understanding and just reflection of ourselves. But it also asks that of the kaupapa. I think some of the benefits I've seen, and I haven't been with Taiki since the start, but some of the benefits that I've seen is that when we come back from rahui, there is a different kind of energy moving into what is the first part of the Māori New Year, but the second part of the Gregorian year. There is a different kind of energy that we're taking into that kind of spring period than if or when we worked the kaupapa the whole way through. I do think there are some hua, and we maybe haven't been in wānanga around this as much, but I do think there are some hua around us thinking about our relationship to the kaupapa. So taiki is not a workplace. It's a place where we choose to be, where we choose to invest our time and our collaborations in that space. When you take an intentional pause and the kaupapa is on pause, you can revisit what that relationship looks and feels like for you. And how it is reciprocal. What does that look and feel like for you in your world? And I think that benefits the kaupapa in the long run. Partly, again, because collectively we're doing that. It's not like I'm taking a week off and I'm like, feeling like everyone else is holding the fort. Actually, the kaupapa is being at rest. The whare that we're in Taiki, for those that haven't been here, holds a really diverse, vast range of kaupapa people kōrero. And so for me also, I feel like, we talk about this in karakia, whakairea te kōrero ki te pātū o te whare, like, release the kōrero to the walls of the whare, and actually resting those walls from all of the stuff that's in them, I think is a really important part of regenerating the kaupapa. And that's more of the wairua metaphysical stuff, but I think we see the benefits of that as well. It's quite hard because we have to say no to things. And we're not good at saying no. I'm not talking just about taiki, I'm talking about just generally in this society. We have to say, people go, we've got this amazing kaupapa, we really want to do it. It's during this week. And we have to go, sorry, the whare is, we're in Rahui. And when we say we're in Rahui, everything is closed. So we actually don't have access to the whare. Like it's very intentional that we're not just kind of, I'll just sneak in and have a meeting, or I'll sneak in and finish this thing in the hack lab. So it is quite an intentional thought around all of the whare and how the whare rest and how we rest. But it also, I think, gives us something to know we have that scheduled in. Every year we know when we hit Matariki, the whare will be in Rahu for a period of time after that.
It sounds like one of the major kind of themes or threads that have gone through in the entire kōrero about your experience of Rahui has been patience. What have been some of the learnings, and from all of your kōrero that you've shared today, it's one of the harder, bigger learnings that you've taken from this is being patient with yourself and how you've interacted with the wider kaupapa that are around you. So what have you learned, Naomi, about patience?
Yeah, well, I would say it's a work in progress kind of a learning, if I'm honest. Yes. There's a couple of things, and actually one of the other ways that we have used Rahui, where I am from, has added a kind of an interesting learning to my thinking around Rahui as well. But we had a pā site that was destroyed by a quarry a number of years ago. And so that area was in Rahui, and it was the similar kind of Rahui that would have been imposed when there is a mate. So the pā site was destroyed, it fell into the quarry, and our kaumātua put a Rahui on that area. And that was, again, in part to acknowledge the loss and to allow the whānau to grieve. And so I think there's an element of that when we are saying goodbye to something, when we are releasing something, there is an element of grief, I think, that sits in there. And that was, quite a visceral grief because it was our pā site. But it was also really interesting to come back to your point around patience, as we wanted to rush in there and fight or fight. Right, our natural instinct is to, I'd probably say, fight or fix. We wanted to rush in there and kind of get in and either fix or fight. And that Rahui, again, made us sit, one, with the grief before we moved into fix or fight mode. but also too with our collective sense of just being, knowing what had happened. And that really gave us a different kind of Māori strength, a different kind of strength for what we knew was to come, in terms of what was going to happen after that. So that's, I think, a really different example of rāhui and what it can teach and what it offers. I think it is a koha. It offers us that pause that we often don't take. And in that case, it was a pause for grief, and it was a pause for collective strengthening for a really long road ahead. I think in terms of the rāhui that we have here at Taiki, there is patience, I think, that I have had to sit with. I think there is some learning around confronting not having things that you do define your value. Right? So when we are working, we are producing things, we are creating things, we are collaborating and doing really cool things. But actually, when you strip that all away, and particularly in a whare like Taiki, we are loved for who we are as people. And I think rāhui gives us that opportunity again to strip all of that away and to sit with ourselves and to show ourselves that same kind of aroha without things defining us. And that's why I kind of say, like, I want to fill it up with doing things, because I feel like that means I've what's the word? I've made the most of rāhui. Like, I think there's a internal struggle of, like, I need to make the most of this rāhui period by learning to make sourdough. I don't know, I'm not learning to make sourdough, but of doing. And it's in the being, I think, and not to say we won't do things, but it's in the being of rāhui, I think, that you can actually learn a lot. And that's not easy. That is confronting. It is harder than filling it with doing things, I think.
There was one kind of off the cuff kind of partai that I've been thinking about while we've been talking about rāhui. So a lot of the people who are a part of the Changemakers network work in intervention. And so a lot of us still have to listen to a lot of kōrero that sits very, very, and has the ability to kind of leech on to Māori for us. How can rāhui support people who work with people on the front line of people with whānau who are going through all the taumahatanga that we have in our world currently? How can rāhui help with this, help with that kaupapa?
Yeah, pātai pai, probably like a disclaimer that I don't sit at that very interface. And so I think those would be really interesting conversations for us to have with our whānau that are sitting right there. I think what an intentional pause does, it does ask us what is ours to carry and what is not ours to carry. I think when we are moving in those kinds of spaces, or when things are heavy, we will often hold on quite tightly to the comfort, and this sounds like a strange thing to say, but to the comfort of that heaviness, even when it's not always ours to hold on to. And so I think rāhui, if it is applied in particular kinds of ways, asks us what is ours to carry and what isn't. And even if something is ours to carry, it actually gives us a gentle nudge of saying, do you want to continue to carry this in this way? Right? It is a prompt for us to kind of think through, what does that actually mean if we decide we want to put that down? And I think often we hold on to things and we think we have to carry it. It's become fused with who we are, or it's a part of our identity, or it's a responsibility that, or an expectation that people have of us. And this asks for a little bit of self-leadership, I think. It asks for kaupapa leadership and collective leadership in terms of our kaupapa, but if we're thinking about it for ourselves as individuals, it asks for self-leadership as well. I think we need to create more intentional spaces for our whānau that are carrying that frontline load. I think that is really important. We are working on a Māori Tau space with Tauwhi as a collaboration, for example, as a little bit of a experiment in what does intentional space in terms of a physical space, but also in terms of a process of moving through some of that heaviness look and feel like for those who are working there. So I think that's something we should all be asking in terms of our organisations and our mahi is, are there physical intentional spaces created for rest and regeneration? And what would that look and feel like for each of our contexts?
That kind of gives me a perfect segue into the pātai from Brian, down in Pōneke. Tēnā koe, Brian. Thanks, Naomi. Great kōrero. I would love to see the concept of rāhui, rest and reflection at this time of year incorporated into my mahi. I see more people getting sick at this time of the year when heading into matariki, and wonder if this is a tohu of the impact of not taking intentional time. Do you have any examples of government groups using rāhui to rest and regenerate their people, kaupapa and place?
Kia ora. Yes, I think this time of year is a really important tohu for us. I think the resurgence of matariki has really shown us the importance of this period of time for remembrance, for reflection, for kind of intention and aspiration setting. And, you know, really beautiful way that has been done with the matariki celebrations. I think there's a risk for lots of us that it's created a whole nother layer of work at a time when we all actually are meant to be resting and regenerating and, you know, being in that rest period. And like if I think about for myself, we have big matariki celebrations back home at the marae. It's a weekend of mahi. Beautiful mahi, beautiful connective mahi, but it's a weekend of mahi as well. And so I think that's a really interesting thing for us to be thinking through as communities, as whānau. How do we do it in a way that does enable some of that rest? I can't answer the second part of that question. I don't know of any government departments that would be proactively doing that. I would make an assumption based on what we know at the moment about the public service that is probably highly unlikely. But I wouldn't be able to name anyone else. Anyone in the government sector. I do know that there are some organisations that may not call it rāhui, but are looking at kind of social policy around kind of rest and periods of rest. Lots of organisations already do it over Christmas, like it's forced annual leave. I don't think that's the same thing. I think a really intentional policy around rest and regeneration or rāhui is quite a different thing from going, oh, well, the organisation's shutting for 2 weeks, so here, take your annual leave now. I don't think that's the same intention as well. But yeah, if anyone does know of any government departments or any other organisations, I think it would be really interesting to see who is doing that. I mean, again, it might not be, I think the time, the factor of time is a really interesting one too. Like we at Taiki, we go into rāhui at matariki and we're off for a week or weekend to weekend. But actually, if you think about the traditional practice of rāhui, it was established when the tohu told us that there was a need, and it was lifted when we knew that that particular area had been regenerated. And so for some of us, that might be a day or two. You know, that might be a day or two of regeneration and we're feeling really good and we're ready to get back to it. For others, it might be 2 or 3 weeks, depending on how they're doing. So I think different, like if we think about it in an organizational context, there will be parameters around what is kind of possible. But I think if we think about it in a traditional context, there was a very careful reading of the mode of a place to understand when rahui was needed and when rahui would be lifted. And it was quite a seasonal thing in some areas. So I think Matariki is a really good example of us returning to some of those seasonal practices as well.
Tēnā koe mō tō pātai. I remember having a conversation with Jeremy Muir. He was one of our local Gisborne District councillors. They have rahui over their mahi at the Gisborne District Council for roughly a month, if I remember correctly. So that is something to aim for. I'm not exactly sure on the entirety of the rules and parameters of that rahui, but if that can happen at a council, why couldn't it happen in government organisations? Why can't it happen amongst other organisations in the public sector, right? Next kind of little kōrero from Zan down in the O3, down in Christchurch. Ngā mihi Naomi, I really needed to hear this. I've got 2 different kaupapa over the matariki period and have been trying to balance, obviously, the delivery and also reflection, rest, and having people leave regenerated. Do you have any kōrero tautoko for the bro Zan in his undertaking of these 2 massive kaupapa he's got in front of him?
Oh, tēnā koe, Zan. Ai, he mihi nuni tēnei kia koe. Kei te mōhio au, kei te rongo au i ngā pukumahi I tēnei wā, I tēnei taima o te tauhou. So thank you for your pātai. I really do see the amount of work that this time of year is asking of people. I think it's really beautiful. I think the regeneration of matariki and of the work that sits in that is really beautiful. And I think exactly your questions are really important. How do we do some of these kaupapa in ways that include reflection and rest? I think we often think that when we come together for kaupapa, we need to, again, this is a very Western concept, but we need to make the most of the time together. And we undervalue, well, I don't think we undervalue, I think it is often undervalued that in those coffee kōrero, in those more spacious lunches, in those whakawhanaungatanga times, or those times where something is not scheduled, that actually a lot of the gold, a lot of the hua, a lot of the learnings come in those times. So one suggestion I have is actually just schedule a really nice break in whatever it is that you're doing in your wānanga. Just actually have a period of time where people can break, they can rest, where there's no expectation of socializing, or if they want to, they can. The other thing I think is when we know things are busy, how do we actually interrupt that after those wānanga? So how do you actually take the time in the next little while to go, yep, these are commitments I have and I have to do, but when that one's finished, here's my period of rest and regeneration, and I'm going to schedule it in, and I'm going to hold that boundary really strong for myself. I think those are really important parts. Particularly when you are holding space for other people, we underestimate the amount of energy that actually requires to hold that space. And so, yeah, pockets of kind of more spacious wānanga, not overloading our schedules so that we're moving from one thing to one thing to one thing all of the time. And really valuing the relationship building piece that we have in those spaces. I've been to lots of kaupapa where I've been in a room with 30 or 40 or more people, and I've had no time to talk to any of them in any meaningful way because the kaupapa has been so busy and fast. And actually, sometimes it's in those hononga that the long-term kind of gains come as well. So yeah, wish you all the best, Zan, and also wish you a scheduled rest in between those 2 big kaupapa or after those kaupapa as well.
Yeah, tēnā koe mō kōrero zan. I think we're going to close it there. Tēnei te mihi kia koe e te hoa. Mō ngā kōrero ko whāriki hei tēnei rā. Big mihi atu you, Names, for the kōrero, for the intelligence, for the learnings that you've shared today on our kaupapa kōrero of Rāhui, which is kind of a perfect segue into this last little bit of our webinar for today. Our webinar will be going into Rāhui as well. We want to kind of close up phase 1 of the Changemakers, of the year of Changemakers that we've had. So we're going to be taking a couple of weeks off to kind of see what we're up to, see what's in front of us, organise what's behind us, and then we'll get back into it by August. Yeah, it's been really cool to be a part of the Changemakers webinar series, the Changemakers kaupapa for this year. We just got a lot of groundwork to do to kind of catch up with it with ourselves, and then be intentional about what kind of kaupapa we are, and then what kind of direction that takes us. So nei rā te mihi atu kia tātou, ko tai mai nei, I runga i te karanga o tēnei rā. I'll close our kōrero with a karakia, no reira kia inoi tātou. E te atua, whakatūwhira te mai kia mātou, ngā huarahi o te tika, te ora, te pono, te kaha, me te māramatanga. Mā mātou koe whakamoimiti, e whakakroria ki tō ingoa tapu. Āmine. Tēnā tātou.